There are moments in life when we feel the weight of the world pressing in on us, when the shadows of doubt seem longer, the voices of uncertainty louder, and the challenges more insurmountable than ever before. It is in these moments, when the hour is late and the pressure mounts, that we hear a still, quiet voice. God's voice, whispering within us, "Tonight is the final test." Not the test we fear, nor one we've imagined, but the test that calls us to rise, to stand firm, and to trust Him like never before. This is not a test of our strength, nor of our cleverness. It is not about how much we know, or how perfectly we perform. It is a test of our heart, our faith, our willingness to surrender, and our courage to move forward, even when the outcome is uncertain. For God, in His wisdom, knows that it is in the moments of greatest challenge, when we are stretched beyond what we thought possible, that we discover what truly lies within us. And it is in this final test that we are not asked to prove ourselves, but to trust that He who has brought us this far will not abandon us now. The beauty of this test is not in its difficulty, but in its invitation. It is a summons to rise above our circumstances and to lean not on our own understanding, but on the wisdom and strength of the One who holds the keys to life itself. This test is not an end, it is the beginning of a deeper journey. A journey where we come to know God not as a distant figure, but as a faithful companion, walking with us through the darkest valleys and the highest peaks. And when we pass through this final test, we will not just be changed, we will be transformed, and our faith will be made more steadfast than ever before. Let us then face this night with courage, knowing that the One who calls us to the test is also the One who empowers us to endure it, and that in every trial, His grace is sufficient. There are times in our lives when we feel as though the moment has come. The test is upon us, and all that we have worked for, all that we have believed in, now rests on the choice we make in the heat of that instant. We do not choose when the tests arrive. We do not know when God will ask us to step up to the challenge that will refine our character, test our faith, and push us to the limit of what we thought we could endure. But the moment comes nonetheless, and it is ours to face. When God says, "Tonight is the final test," it is an invitation, not a burden. It is the call to rise, to meet the challenge, to embrace the moment, not with fear or reluctance, but with the faith that He who calls us is faithful to carry us through. It is the moment when we realize that the test is not meant to break us, but to show us the strength that lies dormant within us, the courage we have yet to tap into, and the deeper trust we have yet to develop in God's plan. To step into the test with faith is to recognize that God is with us, even in the trial. The test is not a punish but a refining process. It is the moment when we are shaped, molded, and prepared for the purpose God has for us. Faith is not merely the absence of fear, it is the presence of trust, the willingness to move forward even when we do not know the outcome. Faith is the strength to step forward when the road ahead seems unclear, when the future is uncertain, and when the stakes feel higher than ever before. In these moments, we are reminded that we are never alone. God's strength is made perfect in our weakness. The test we face is not one we have to endure in our own power. The strength to overcome comes from the One who has walked this road before us, who knows every bend, every obstacle, and every victory. He walks with us through the darkest valley, not leading us away from the test, but through it. And when we embrace the moment, when we step forward in faith, we find that we are equipped not by our own strength, but by His. To embrace the moment is also to release the need for control. It is the realization that we do not have to know every step. We do not have to have the answers in advance. We need only to trust that God has already paved the way, even if we cannot see it yet. The test is not about having all the answers. It is about trusting that, even in our uncertainty, God is at work in us and through us. So when God says, "Tonight is the final test," let us not shrink back in fear or anxiety. Let us step forward with faith, knowing that this moment, this test, is the opportunity to discover something greater than ourselves, the opportunity to discover the power of God at work in us, the power of faith to carry us through, and in that discovery we will be changed. We will not be the same person who entered the test. We will be stronger, wiser, and more deeply rooted in the truth that God is with us, and in Him we can face whatever comes. When the final test arrives, we often find ourselves focused on the challenge before us. It may seem daunting, overwhelming even, as though the weight of the world rests upon our shoulders. We measure ourselves against the obstacle, trying to determine whether we have the strength, the skill, or the wisdom to meet it head-on. Yet in those moments, we must remember that the true measure of the test is not about our own strength or ability. It is about trusting God beyond the challenge, recognizing that the victory does not rest on what we can accomplish on our own, but on what He will do through us. In life, we often judge success by outward accomplishments, how we perform, how we manage, how we overcome. But God measures success by the depth of our trust in Him. The test, in His eyes, is not about proving how capable we are. It is about proving to ourselves how faithful He is, how trustworthy His promises are, and how fully we are willing to surrender to His will. When we stand at the crossroads of the final test, the question before us is not, "Can I do this?" but, "Will I trust God to do this through me?" Trusting God beyond the challenge requires a shift in perspective. It is not enough to look at the difficulty of the situation and assume we are alone in facing it. We are never alone. When God calls us to a test, He equips us with everything we need to pass it. The test is not meant to reveal our deficiencies, but to reveal God's sufficiency. It is through our weakness that His strength is made perfect. Our frailty becomes the vehicle for His power. And so, when we trust God beyond the challenge, we are acknowledging that the outcome is not determined by our capacity, but by His grace. This trust is not passive. It is an active decision, a choice to step into the unknown with the confidence that God will provide, that He will guide, and that He will give us the strength we need to endure. Trusting God beyond the challenge means laying down our own plans, our own timelines, and our own understanding. It means recognizing that His ways are higher than our ways, His thoughts higher than our thoughts, and His plan far greater than any plan we could have crafted on our own. It is easy to trust God when the path is clear, when the answers are obvious, and when the road is smooth. But the true test of our faith comes when the road is uncertain, when the challenge is greater than we imagined, and when the way forward is unclear. It is in these moments that God calls us to trust Him fully, to believe that He is working all things together for our good, even when we cannot see how. This trust is the foundation upon which the final test stands. It is the trust that says, even if I cannot see the outcome, I know that God is faithful and I will follow Him. And so, as we face the final test, let us remember that it is not the challenge itself that defines us, but the trust we place in God. The true measure of the test is not how well we perform, but how deeply we trust God to work through us. This trust will carry us through, and in the end we will see that it is not our strength, but His, that has brought us to victory. There is a profound truth hidden within the trials we face. It is in the struggle that we are shaped, refined, and ultimately transformed. The difficulties we encounter in life are not mere obstacles to be avoided or endured. They are tools in the hands of a loving God, carefully sculpting us into the people He has created us to be. Strength is not forged in ease, nor is wisdom gained in comfort. It is through the fire of adversity that we are purified, strengthened, and made whole. In every trial, there is a lesson to be learned. The struggle we face, however painful it may be, is never wasted. It serves a greater purpose. It is in the moments of deepest weakness that we discover the depth of God's strength. It is in the moments of greatest uncertainty that we come to know the faithfulness of God's promises. When the storm rages around us and we feel as though we are being tossed to and fro, it is then that we realize that we are held by something far stronger than ourselves, God's unshakable love. The final test is not meant to break us, but to build us. It is through the struggle that we are strengthened. The pressures we face are the very means by which our character is refined. Just as gold is purified in the fire, so too is our faith purified in the furnace of affliction. It is in these moments that we are called to lean on God's strength, to trust that He is at work in ways we cannot yet see, and to surrender our own will to His greater plan. Each struggle, each difficulty, each test is a step towards becoming the person God intends us to be. There is a beauty in this process, though it may be difficult to see in the moment. As we endure the struggles of life, we are slowly transformed into vessels of grace, instruments of God's love and power. We emerge from the trials not as we were, but as something stronger, more resilient, more capable of facing the challenges ahead. The strength we gain in the struggle is not a strength of our own making. It is a strength that comes from God alone. And when we look back, we will see that the trials, though they seemed insurmountable at the time, were the very things that equipped us for the next stage of our journey. In this way, the struggles we face are not to be feared. They are to be embraced, for they hold the potential to shape us into something more beautiful, more faithful, and more dependent on God's grace. Strength is not built in the absence of struggle, but in the overcoming of it. The more we trust God in the midst of our trials, the more we are transformed into the image of Christ, and the stronger our faith becomes. And so, as we face the final test, let us remember that it is in the struggle that we find our true strength. The test is not a sign of our inadequacy, it is the process through which God prepares us for something greater. When we face the trials with faith and trust in God's purpose, we will emerge stronger, wiser, and more equipped to face whatever challenges lie ahead. When we are in the midst of a trial, it can be difficult to see beyond the immediate pain or frustration. The challenges we face often feel overwhelming, and the purpose behind them may seem elusive. Yet, it is precisely in these moments that we are called to trust that God has a purpose for every trial, a reason behind every test. The final test is no exception. It is part of a larger, divine plan, a plan that is unfolding even when we cannot fully see it. God's purpose in every trial is not punitive, it is redemptive. He does not delight in our suffering, but He uses it to draw us closer to Him, to refine our hearts, and to deepen our faith. Each trial, each test, is an opportunity for us to grow and mature in our relationship with God. It is an invitation to trust Him more deeply, to rely on His strength, and to surrender our will to His. The final test is not the end of the journey, but a pivotal moment that leads to greater intimacy with God and a greater understanding of His purpose for our lives. God does not waste any of our pain. Every moment of suffering, every moment of struggle has a divine purpose that is beyond our comprehension. In the midst of the trial, we may question why we are facing such difficulty, but we can be assured that God is at work even when we cannot see the full picture. He is using every moment to shape us into the people He has called us to be, to prepare us for the work He has for us, and to mold us into the image of His Son. The final test, like every trial, is part of God's greater purpose for our lives. It is through the test that we are refined, strengthened, and made ready for the next season of our journey. We may not understand why we are facing this particular challenge at this particular moment, but we can trust that God is sovereign and He knows exactly what we need. His purpose is always good, and He is always working for our good, even when the way forward is unclear. When we begin to understand that every trial has a purpose, it changes the way we approach the test. Instead of seeing it as a burden or a curse, we begin to see it as an opportunity to grow, to trust, and to become more like Christ. The final test is not something to fear, but something to embrace, knowing that God is using it to bring about something greater in our lives. The test is part of His divine plan, and through it, we are being prepared for the next step in our journey. And so, as we face the final test, let us remember that God's purpose is always at work, even in the most challenging moments. The test is not without meaning. It is a purposeful process that shapes us, refines us, and prepares us for the future God has for us. Trust in the knowledge that God is with us, guiding us through every trial, and that He will bring us through to the other side, stronger, wiser, and more deeply connected to His will. When we face the final test, we often approach it with a mindset that says, "I must succeed. I must prove myself. I must be strong enough to conquer this challenge." There is an inherent desire within us to rise above the difficulty, to stand firm, and to emerge victorious. But as we wrestle with the test, we realize that the victory does not come from our own strength or willpower. It comes from surrender. In surrendering to God's plan, we find the grace to overcome and the peace that transcends the struggle. Victory in surrender may seem paradoxical. In a world that prizes self-reliance and strength, surrender feels like a weakness. Yet the truth is that surrender is the ultimate strength. It is the willingness to lay down our own efforts, our own agendas, and our own understanding in exchange for God's guidance and His power. When we surrender, we acknowledge that we cannot do it alone, and we invite God to step in and work through us in ways we cannot. This is where true victory is found, not in our striving, but in our trusting. The final test is not about us proving ourselves, it is about us proving God's faithfulness. It is in the act of surrender that we allow God to do His perfect work in us. This surrender is not passive. It is an active choice. It is the decision to let go of control, to stop fighting against the circumstances, and to trust that God is in control. In the act of surrender, we acknowledge that we are not the authors of our own stories. God is. He knows the beginning from the end, and He has already prepared the way for us. Victory in surrender also means trusting God with the outcome, whatever it may be. It is easy to surrender when we know how things will turn out. But true surrender comes when we release our expectations and allow God to have His way. We trust that His plan is greater than our own, even if it doesn't look the way we imagined. In surrender, we place our faith not in the outcome, but in the One who holds the outcome. We trust that, in His perfect wisdom, He will guide us through, and that His plan is always for our good, even when we don't understand it. As we pass through the final test, we find that it is not our own strength that carries us, but God's grace. It is through His grace that we are able to endure, to overcome, and to emerge victorious. And the victory is not in our ability to conquer the test, but in our ability to surrender to God's will, trusting that He will accomplish what we cannot. In surrender we find peace. In surrender we find strength. In surrender we find victory. So as we face the final test, let us not hold on to our own strength, but release it to God. Let us surrender the outcome to Him and trust that He is working in ways we cannot see. When we surrender, we will find that God's grace is sufficient for every moment, and that in His strength we are more than conquerors. The final test will not be the end, it will be the beginning of a new chapter, one in which we experience the fullness of God's grace and power. As we face the final test, let us remember that it is not in our strength, but in our surrender, that true victory is found. God does not ask us to conquer the test in our own power. He calls us to trust Him, to step forward in faith, and to lean on His grace. Every challenge we face is an opportunity for growth, transformation, and deeper intimacy with our Creator. As we surrender to His will, we will emerge stronger, wiser, and more prepared for the journey ahead. Trust in His faithfulness, for He is with us every step of the way.